to get back to my original point, Khrushchev and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So let's just start off with some Khruschev. The United States, on the other end, was bent on directly interfering in the internal affairs of Cuba. The Americans wanted to force Cuba away from the path of socialism and make it drag behind American policy just as it had before the victory of the Cuban Revolution, when puppet presidents made it easy for the U.S. to exploit Cuba. For our part, we wanted Cuba to remain revolutionary and socialist, and we knew Cuba needed help in order to do so. Cuba is a small island in both population and territory. It doesn't have much industry of its own, and its army is equipped with weapons bought from other countries. When I say weapons, I mean real weapons, not just field weapons. They probably manufacture their own rifles, but they don't produce their own heavy stuff. It was up to us to supply it. We had no other way of helping them meet the American threat except to install our missiles on the island, so as to confront the aggressive forces of the United States with a dilemma. If you invade Cuba, you'll have to face a nuclear missile attack against your own cities. Our intention was to install the missiles not to wage war against the U.S., but to prevent the U.S. from invading Cuba and thus starting a war. All we wanted was to give the new progressive system created in Cuba by Fidel Castro a chance to work. We stationed our armed forces on Cuban soil for one purpose only: to maintain the independence of the Cuban people and to prevent the invasion by a mercenary expeditionary force which the United States was then preparing to launch. We had no intention of starting a war ourselves. We've always considered war to be against our interest. We've never thought in terms of any other than defensive war. Anyone with an ounce of sense can see I'm telling the truth. It would have been preposterous for us to unleash a war against the United States from Cuba. Cuba is 11,000 kilometers from the Soviet Union. Our sea and air communications with Cuba were so precarious that an attack against the U.S. was unthinkable. So as tensions rose to the point where war might break out, our countries resorted to secret diplomacy. We maintained contact with President Kennedy through his brother Robert. He came to our embassy and expressed on behalf of the president a desire to reach an agreement, and he also consented to transmit our demands to the president. Our position was this: we would withdraw our missiles from Cuba on the condition that the United States would make a public statement pledging not to invade Cuba and promising to restrain its allies from doing so. President Kennedy said that in exchange for the withdrawal of our missiles, he would remove American missiles from Turkey and Italy. We knew perfectly well that this pledge was of a symbolic nature. The American rockets in Turkey and Italy were already obsolete, and the Americans would promptly replace them with more modern ones. So JFK is smart, right? Oh, yeah, we'll take the American missiles out of Turkey and Italy. No, we'll take out of Turkey and Italy. This is Khruschev, right? He's saying from Turkey and Italy. And so there was, anyways, I heard that there was some controversy whether or not he agreed to take the missiles out of Italy, but here's Khruschev saying that's what he said, right? But then he also says that, they would have taken the old ones out and then just brought in brand new ones anyways. So that was the whole deal, right? They thought there was going to be old ones, it's just symbolic. So he wasn't really, but if they could have actually got that done, anyways. Besides, the U.S. was already equipping its Navy with Polaris missiles. Nevertheless, by agreeing even to symbolic measures, Kennedy was creating the impression of mutual concessions. The resolution of the Caribbean crisis came as a historic landmark. For the first time in history, the Americans pledged publicly not to invade one of their neighbors and not to interfere in its internal affairs. This was a bitter pill for the U.S. to swallow. It was worse than that. The American imperialist beast was forced to swallow a hedgehog. Quills and all that hedgehog is still in its stomach, undigested. No surgical operation to remove the hedgehog is possible, as long as the Soviet-American agreement on Cuba is in effect. We behaved with dignity and forced the U.S. to demobilize and to recognize Cuba, not de jure, but de facto. Cuba still exists today as a result of the correct policy conducted by the Soviet Union when it rebuffed the United States. I'm proud of what we did. Looking back on the episode, I feel pride in my people and the policies we conducted and in the victories we won on the diplomatic front. The experience of the Caribbean crisis also convinced us that we were right to concentrate on the manufacture of nuclear missiles rather than on the expansion of our surface navy, as Kuznetsov had recommended, and which he admitted would have cost billions and taken at least 10 years. Now, I'd like to say a few words about John Kennedy. We'll get to that in a second. So let's talk a little bit about what he's talking about here. So, he knew it was a symbolic thing, didn't know if they would actually get removed. It was both Turkey and Italy. So whether Kennedy actually did it or not, he said it was kind of a moot point, just the fact that they were creating the impression of mutual concessions. And then the biggest, I would say the biggest success for Khrushchev would be that Kennedy said, we're not going to attack Cuba. None of our allies, nobody's going to attack Cuba. Cuba is its own sovereign nation. And so that's a major turn. The fact that that's the first time in American history that the U.S. government had to say, we cannot invade Bolivia. We are not going to go into Venezuela. We will not invade Cuba. So in the Western Hemisphere with the Truman Doctrine, apparently we're allowed to invade any place that we want to invade. So when I think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, the biggest thing that I think about is just how close the whole world came to blowing up with nuclear weapons. So there was this one incident, or this one specific story that, came out like 10 years ago, but there's 3 commanders on board, and they agreed to unanimously agree on a nuclear attack. If it came down to it, all 3 commanders had to say yes. And that wasn't on all the Russian submarines. Not all the Russian submarines had that protocol, just that one, okay? And so you have the U.S., okay, you got 11 Navy destroyers, USS Randolph aircraft carrier up above, so you got all these boats above, and then, Russia's submarine is just floating on, on down on the bottom of the sea. And the submarine is a nuclear-charged Foxtrot class sub B-59. And it's near Cuba. So this is going to be the most dangerous moment in the Cold War. This is going to be the most dangerous moment in all of world human history. Okay, so the Russians got a nuclear-charged Foxtrot B-59 submarine by Cuba. Yeah, 11 Navy destroyers. You got an aircraft carrier, the USS Randolph. And they were signaling depth charges. And these are explosives which could blow a submarine up. And so the way that I read it was just saying that the depth charges being dropped by the United States ships was just to tell it to come back up. So it was like a warning, right? Kind of like a flare gun of sorts. But, to the 3 commanders on board, they think that they're being attacked. They're also, the air conditioning's broke, so it's getting hot. They're breathing out all this carbon monoxide. They're seeing these depth charges. And I don't know for sure if it's a warning, because I know that a depth charge could sink a submarine. A depth charge could have sunk it. So either they're like, okay, we're under attack, what the fuck can we do? And then they just went back to Russia, and they kind of got shamed for all their shit. But they came within, minutes, within just seconds of essentially annihilating 100 cities or so in America. It would have been a nuclear winter. It would have been one of the worst, the worst thing that humans could ever have done. We destroyed ourselves, right? And so we're going to destroy ourselves because Kennedy had to save face. Kennedy didn't want to look weak, even though, yeah, we got, missiles in Turkey, but you can't put missiles in Cuba. Why? Cuba isn't America. It's not you. It's their country, and they can have, why can't they have nukes to defend themselves? You just invaded them at the Bay of Pigs. And so Russia was coming to Cuba's defense. It doesn't make any sense that Russia would have used Cuba as a launching pad. Sure, if something, went off, they would have used all resources. But to say, okay, first we're going to take Cuba, and then from Cuba, we're going to take over the rest of America. I mean, I guess all you need is just a little foothold, but it's too small, and like he was talking about the communications and all that, it was just too far. So to think that that was the possibility, take Cuba and then take America, that's absolutely, insane. So I believe Khrushchev. I don't believe that he was trying to start a war with America. Maybe, he could understand how he was being somewhat provocative. And then the biggest thing, okay, so within seconds, so 3 commanders on board, they have these depth charges blowing up, and then 2 of them say yes, and then a guy named Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov, so Vasily saved the world. A guy named Vasily said no. So within seconds, within minutes of saying, all right, we're going to push this, button, instead, the submarine, they needed to come up for air. They're surrounded by American warships. They had a nuke on board. They're ready to launch it. But what happened? They came up for air. Nothing, no incident happened. So nothing happened. Nothing happened. The United States, that was the warships were sending these depth charges, and to the Russian submarine, they didn't, respond in kind. They got out of Dodge, and then nothing happened after that. So the main results of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because of Robert Kennedy doing these secret deals, what's up with the secret deals? No nuclear missiles in Cuba for, in exchange for no Jupiter ballistic nuke missiles in Italy and Turkey. The creation of a hotline between the United States and the USSR, so that way you could just pick up the phone and immediately, instead of having to go through backdoor channels, go to the embassy, now you just pick up the phone and just, call them directly. And then the United States promised to never invade Cuba without direct provocation. So that was the results of the Cuban Missile Crisis. On JFK, he only had 2 years, so I've heard him being a hawk and a dove, so his, legacy is undefined, but, I guess we get to put whatever we want on JFK. All that, all those dreams, all those aspirations, he could have been great, he could have done something, he could have been a contender. Another interesting moment that most people don't know about, or something fantastic, actually, about the Cuban Missile Crisis, is that in 1992, the Soviet Union had already had 100 tactical nuclear weapons in their possession in Cuba. So then, the American blockade, JFK is going to say, hey, I think you're building nuclear, facilities in Cuba, so we're going to have a blockade, and we're going to blockade for, any boats from going in, and now you can't get your nukes here. And so now it's all tense, right? Russia's like, well, it's international waters. We're allowed to go wherever we want to go. How are you going to sit there and tell us what to do? And so they got this blockade, which some people says is an act of war. I don't think it's outright an act of war, but it could, be perceived as one. And anyways, the Soviet Union already had 100 tactical nuclear weapons on the island of Cuba, so they already had nukes there. So stopping the ships and having the quarantine, and then Khruschev, promising not to put any nukes on the island. There were 100 nukes on the island, and then Khruschev is going to keep them there until December 1962. And apparently they were put into a bunch of, wooden, boxes and sent back. So, yeah, or maybe that's just what we're being told. But that was, in 62, they went ahead and they made the deal. They said, take your nukes down from Turkey and Italy, and, we'll promise never to invade Cuba, and we'll be cool. And he's like, all right, I'll promise. We won't invade Cuba. And we'll take our missiles down from Turkey, snickering the whole time. But meanwhile, they had 100 nukes sitting in Cuba. So, this is the most dangerous moment, in all of world history. This was 1 minute to midnight. That atomic clock says we're 100 seconds to midnight, so we're like a whole another 40 seconds more to midnight. Midnight being the, extinction of all humanity. 1 minute to midnight. Within 1 minute of everybody on, the face of the planet. They said apparently they could have bombed everything in America, the continental America, up to Seattle. So New York, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Minnesota, Texas, all of it. So 100 nukes could have done some major damage. So 100 nukes are sitting in Cuba. And we found that out, I think, in 1992. America was on DEFCON 2, naval blockade, some says is an act of war. Robert F. Kennedy was sent to secretly negotiate with Khruschev, And then he met the Soviet ambassador to the U.S. in some embassy. Was it in America, probably? So, yeah, JFK started it all by putting the Jupiter nuke missiles in Turkey. And then promised to take them down, which did he, didn't he, who knows, right? They both promised to not put their nukes in the country that they both kept nukes in. The Caribbean crisis, I think that Khrushchev acted very honorably. If it wasn't for the Russians, we would have taken over Cuba. We tried to do it with the Bay of Pigs, and if they don't defend themselves, then they're just sitting ducks. I mean, they wiped everybody out, right? Everybody out in the Bay of Pigs. They wiped them, they captured them all or killed them all. And so those are exiles. Those were not American troops. Those were American-trained ex-Cubans. So therefore, we were just helping, ex-Cubans try to fight to get their country back. Che Guevara is going to say that the Cuban Revolution is stronger now more than ever because of the Bay of Pigs. And he would have been right. After that, Khruschev and they had their back. And so the Cold War, 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the Cold War went on forever. So America and Russia was just hating each other for, 4 or 5 decades. And then the Cuban Missile Crisis, this 13-day confrontation after the United States government, after JFK discovered Soviet ballistic missiles deployed in Cuba. So now let's talk, last but not least, about what Khrushchev thought about Kennedy. I'd like to say a few words about John Kennedy. You can find people who tell you that Kennedy was to blame for the tensions which might have resulted in war. Well, this is my answer to those clever people who like to ask clever questions. You have to keep in mind the era in which we live. This is a transitional period in history. The question of who will prevail over whom is being resolved on a worldwide scale. The dying capitalist system is grasping at straws to maintain and, if possible, to strengthen its position. It was in that context that the Caribbean crisis arose. We found ourselves in a serious confrontation with the President of the United States. In such situations, one cannot be afraid of conflict, but at the same time, one must keep one's wits and not allow the conflict to turn into war. In other words, one must have an intelligent, sober-minded counterpart with whom to deal. At that point in my political career, my partner was Kennedy, the head of the mightiest capitalist country in the world. I believe he was a man who understood the situation correctly and who genuinely did not want war. He realized that the time had passed when such disputes could be decided by force. He was realistic enough to see that now the might of the socialist world equaled that of the capitalist world. Kennedy is also someone we could trust. When he gave us public assurances that the U.S. would not organize an invasion of Cuba, either on its own or through its allies, we trusted him. We accepted the concession he was making and made a concession of our own by withdrawing our nuclear weapons from Cuba. What kind of man was Kennedy? As regards our backgrounds, he and I were poles apart. I was a miner, a metal fitter, who, by the will of the party and the people, rose to be the prime minister of my country. Kennedy was a millionaire and the son of a millionaire. He pursued the goal of strengthening capitalism, while I sought to destroy capitalism and create a new social system based on the teachings of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. As our meeting in Vienna demonstrated, we held diametrically opposing views on many important questions. Despite the irreconcilability of our class antagonism, however, Kennedy and I found a common ground and a common language when it came to prevent the military conflict. For example, we agreed to establish a direct line of communication between us, bypassing diplomatic channels to be used in case of emergency. Some people may say, who needs it? I say, it may come in handy someday. I'd like to pay my respects to Kennedy, my former opposite number in the serious conflict which arose between our countries. He showed great flexibility, and together we avoided disaster. When he was assassinated, I felt sincere regret. I went straight to the U.S. Embassy and expressed my condolences. So Khrushchev was sad to hear that, when Kennedy was assassinated. He respected him. He trusted him. He did not believe that Kennedy was for war. And so Khrushchev acts like basically him and Kennedy saved the world. But it was really, I guess John F. Kennedy's blind, egotistical insecurity and feeling that he needed to stand up. That reason why, I mean, why was there even a confrontation to begin with? The nuclear missiles got there anyways, and hell, they still might be there for all anybody knows. So, yeah, that's Khrushchev on the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is there anything else I want to mention? Because I started this, and this would be the second and the last. I guess this is pretty much it. So the main thing, like, I think those are two big things. They sent 100 nukes. They got 100 nukes to the island. And then the other thing was that, you know, we were just 1 minute away from absolute nuclear annihilation. And the fact that we're only 40 seconds today, so that was a minute to midnight, the closest ever in human history, but we're still only 100 seconds away from midnight. I'd like to get, you know, maybe 5 minutes away from midnight. Can we get, like, I don't know, maybe 100 years away from, you know, total annihilation of all humans on the planet Earth? Can we get to that? Is that okay? Last thing I'll mention is that Fidel Castro, he, you know, has his issues, but he didn't want the nukes. Khruschev had to push Fidel Castro to take the nukes, and then once Fidel Castro, you know, accepted them, and then they had, you know, the crisis happened, and he agreed to take them away. Then Fidel Castro once again gets pissed. So Fidel Castro was pissed, you know, that he was being forced to take these nuclear weapons, and then once he got them, then he was pissed that he had to give them up, if he gave them up at all. It was in October. Cuban Missile Crisis speech was given in October 22nd, so 1962 is the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so 1962, right, so they had 100 nukes. Eventually, we're told December of 1962, they went ahead and the Russians took the nukes from Cuba. But how do they know for sure that the nukes were taken out of Turkey and Italy? And like he said, it was a symbolic gesture. So essentially, let's not blow each other up right now. You can probably keep your nukes on Cuba. You can keep your nukes on Turkey. And what the fuck are we going to do? How are we going to stop this shit? Nukes are just proliferating all over the place. And if Cuba does have, it might be one of the, you know, I mean, Cuba does stand today because of the Soviet Union. I don't think Cuba would still be there. Not under Fidel Castro, not under, you know, a revolutionary socialist. Oh, they will have a different economic system than us? Oh my God! A different economic system? I don't even know if Americans are really fucking capitalists, right? We should be buying and selling all other stuff, exploiting, capitalizing. Should be yard sales. It should be, you know, bartering, buying and selling. That should just be constant, buying and selling all the time. I don't remember anybody saying, I'm a capitalist. I'm gonna be a capitalist. My daddy's daddy was a capitalist, and my daddy's daddy was a capitalist. I don't really hear any Americans actually like brag and talk about being a capitalist. I hear people saying, "Get a job." Why don't you get a job? So that, you know, so you don't have to give a shit about anybody else. Oh, you're having a tough time. Oh, you got a flat tire and you need someone to help jack it up. And why don't you just get a fucking job? How's that helping with the flat tire? It doesn't. You're a piece of shit. Get the fuck out of my face. Yeah, so good times. Khruschev and the Cuban Missile Crisis, everybody.